Okay, well, I guess we can go ahead and get started now. Hello, and everyone. I am Lori Gaventer, and thank you for joining us today. I'm a program manager at the Brown University School of Professional Studies, and we are thrilled you've chosen to participate in this masterclass on a new era of reindustrialization, how to master a capital-efficient green transition at scale. We hope to be your partner in overcoming all your leadership challenges now and in the future. At the School of Professional Studies, our mission is to empower you with the skills, resources, and networks needed to change the world for the better. Climate change and sustainability are among the most pressing issues facing government and the private sector today. We offer a variety of programs, from certificates to master's degrees, tailored to your career stage, whether you're just starting, mid-career, or at senior level. Programs span topics like leadership, sustainability, healthcare, coaching, applied AI, and data science. We also design custom programs for organizations. Our delivery formats include online, in-person, and asynchronous options for busy lifestyles. And now let's turn our attention to the topic of the hour, changing the math on climate change. But first, a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. We have 1 hour together with most of our time devoted to the content of our session, followed by about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of our session available for Q&A. If you would please use the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen to post your questions at any time, I'll be watching for them. Also, the chat feature is available for your use during the session as well to post comments or respond to any questions from the speakers. But please put your questions for the speakers into the Q&A. I'm excited to introduce Laurits Bach Sørensen. Laurits is a senior partner and co-founder of Nordic Alpha Partners, Europe's first private equity fund dedicated to sustainable growth investments. He has raised over 1 billion euros to accelerate the global green transition, including investing in numerous green technology startups. Prior to establishing Nordic Alpha Partners, he spent 20 years spearheading startups and venture growth businesses. He has led several IPOs, selling businesses to Tesla, Edenrock, Aptian, and Destiny Group. His upcoming book, Change the Math, sets out his strategy for creating hypergrowth in transformative industries. I am also excited to introduce Mark Blyth. Mark is the William R. Rhodes Professor of International Economics and Director of the Rhodes Center for International Economics and Finance at the Watson Institute for at Brown University. He also holds a joint appointment in the Department of Political Science. He is author of many award-winning books, including Austerity, The History of a Dangerous Idea, Angrynomics, Diminishing Returns, The New Politics of Growth and Stagnation, and the forthcoming Inflation, A Guide for Users and Losers. Laurits and Mark, thank you for joining us. Let's dive into how you change the math on climate change.
So let me get the screen up here.
Laura, you're going to have to take your slides off. There we go. That's it. Laura. Cool.
You see the screen. So thanks for the intro, Laurie, and thanks for having me on here today. It is going to be a very interesting session here. Looking forward to the questions that's coming later. So the theme was set up. So in order to get this started, let me little on. Okay, there we go. So a little on my background, a little more. Prior to establishing Nordic Alpha Partners back in 2017 with Rasmus and Rhodes, I've had 20 years of operational background, essentially doing everything from corporate spin-outs, corporate turnarounds, doing my own startups, also leading private equity companies. And throughout this period of time, I've been looking at how to actually deal with ultra-complex business environments. And that is really the essence of the coming book that's going to be launched here in the first half, calling Changing the Math, and was also the fundamentals of the creation of Nordic Alpha Partners with Rasmus and Rhodes. So the whole idea was that this new tool set was going to be able to penetrate segments in the market where the conventional private equity model did not want to go. And that is the ultra-complex growth phase for hard tech and green tech. So here now, 7 years later, we are now considered the first fund in Europe to really dedicate ourselves to this. As you said before, raised 1 billion in total to the green transition. The average growth rate in our portfolio is 65% CAC, so that's 65% growth every year. We've raised 30% of all new IPO capital in Denmark the last 4 years. And in general, our portfolio has abated more than 1 million tons of CO2 now, and also some of the exits up here. So that's a little on the fundamentals. let's jump into the situation, because I guess there's many people right now out there saying, being a green tech growth investor in the environment right now, is that actually a good thing to be? And for sure, the green transition is proving to be very difficult. There are many drivers out there that doesn't look to be pro green tech. First of all, with the new change of leadership in North America, buzzwords like drill baby drill is things that are actually drawing attention away from the general green transition. We also see the green stocks not performing very well. We've seen a lot of negative media coverage, and I think it's probably more in Europe than it is in North America. So altogether, does that mean that the green transition is losing its relevance? Not at all. On the contrary, because the world, with its new geopolitical reality, is moving into a new reality. And maybe just a little for context, if we look at how the world has been industrialized over the last 150 years, essentially we had your second industrial revolution, then you had the globalization of the industry, and then you've seen in the early series, we saw the first wave of green transition technologies coming out in larger scale. With the new geopolitical reality, this is going to change rapidly, because right now, as the world is developing, we cannot be in a situation where the different regions of the world are depending on globalization. And that is accelerating a complete new level of investment that is unseen as what we've seen before. Bloomberg NEF is actually estimating that the decarbonization and the reindustrialization of the world will be a whopping $215 trillion over the next 2.5 to 3 decades. And just to put that in context, that is more than 100 times of the total second industrial revolution, and up to 10x the cost of the globalized infrastructure as we know it today. So it's a huge amount of investment. And it possesses a huge opportunity if you're actually able to deal with it. So maybe just one more slide on some of the drivers that you're going to be seeing around this. So in order to really reindustrialize, there are 5 factors that needs to be within the different regions. We're talking technology, definitely talent, scarce material. There's no doubt, if you've been following the media, US have shown a lot of interest in Greenland. I think it's been packaged around being a security element. I fundamentally believe it comes down to what's in the ground in China, in Greenland. I don't think the Russians are going to walk over Greenland. It's going to be one hell of a ride. I do believe that Trump is very interested in what's inside that ground, because if you want to reindustrialize, you need to have access to scarce material. And looking at what is needed within reindustrialization, the Western world does not have what it takes. Other things are production infrastructure. So we cannot rely on being production happening across the world. We need to have critical production within our regions. And then obviously independent energy production. This is actually creating a big opportunity for the green transition, because the majority of these things are actually forcing forward green technology transformation and green adoption. And yes, you could argue, or one of the arguments out there is that, why don't we just bring up gas and oil? Well, you cannot reindustrialize based on that. The way we are going to do new production facilities, it needs to be based on electrification, on automation, and the power grid as it is today will not be able to adopt this new reality. So we need green technologies to do this. But it possesses a new challenge, because the green reindustrialization isn't software, it's hard tech. On the left side here, you can see all the different subsectors. There are no green tech sector. These are all the subsectors that we're going to see large acceleration. And these are the majority of the sectors where all the huge investments are going to go into. And many of these are really at the core of reindustrialization. They have one thing in common, and they're all hard tech. It's not that there's not a digital layer, but they're hard tech. And that means complex supply chain, exposed to certifications, working capital, high CapEx intensity, long innovation cycles, all these things that are tied down with hardware. And again, remember on my previous slide, we're talking very fast-paced accelerated growth. So this is why we're seeing the green tech valley of death. This is why a lot of the investors here are struggling, because there's a mismatch with the need to do these things and the general adoption, because it's hard tech. And this is also when we established Nordic Alpha Partners, that none of the proven private equity platforms wanted to do this, because the conventional PE model cannot scale these companies at a pace that is needed in order for them to drive return. And all in all, this is accelerating a new level of complexity. So the hardware side is actually just one critical component inside of that. If you look at this, there's a new term you're going to get used to called hypertransformation, and it has 4 driving factors inside of it. If you look at the other 2 sides, that is the externality. If you look at reindustrialization and the green transformation in general, the majority of that is the establishment of new value chains. And that means either disruption or complete new value chains. If you look at recycling, recycling is essentially a disruption of waste management. Furthermore, you have high third-party dependencies. And as you're moving down these value chains, you might have the best technology. A good example is fuel cells. We've looked a lot at fuel cells, and they're ready now. They're actually ripe to go industrial. However, there's no green hydrogen because the pipeline for green hydrogen is just not there, which means that you're going to have a technology that's ready, but you not have a value chain that can actually adopt it. On the other side, we're talking tech transformation. And here, the pace and time between being TL, so technology ready level, the innovation level of 9, so being ready for the market, to having going to utility grade needs to happen at an unseen pace. That means huge J-curves and a lot of investments in order to accelerate that. In the previous industrial revolutions, we had a long time to do that. We do not have that. Those are the externalities. On the inside of the business, if you're running one of these companies or if you're actually investing, you have the hard tech element as we discussed before. But on the other side, we're also talking hypergrowth. And hypergrowth is defined as 40% growth every year. When you're talking a hard tech value chain and you're growing 40% or 65% as the average company does within Nordic Alpha's portfolio, well, then you have an enormous tie down on next year's acceleration. And you have to do this over and over and over again for a decade in order for you to come to the company that actually can be a large player within this industry. These 4 factors combined is why you don't see private equity funds wanting to invest into growth investment. But it's also why we're seeing such a struggle with many of the green technology transformations that we're seeing out there. So why isn't this working? Why can't we deal with this? Well, essentially, it's because business school theory, as we know it, is not designed for this complexity. If you look at the majority of business school, I went to Copenhagen Business School, it's not designed to manage these 4 vectors at the same time. It's based on corporate ideas. And even if you look at the theories, there's so many great books out there, talks about transformation, crossing the chasm and all these things. They are not providing a systematic end-to-end toolkit enabling you to really manage this complexity. And without such models, the green transition will simply not happen capital efficiently. The amount of $215 trillion that's going to go into that is the equivalent of 8% of world GDP tomorrow. So annually until the next 25 years, 30 years, or 4 times what we spend on military globally. If we're not able to fuel the free market into this, the pension funds, the private equity funds, having companies to serve this, we're not going to do this capital efficiently. And then we're not going to end up rich at the end of this transformation. So what we've done at Nordic Alpha, we look at this in 2 ways. So on one side, we have what we call the economic sustainability model. These are the 2 vectors or drivers that we see drives a capital efficient green transition. On the y-axis, we have a growth efficiency KPI that we invented ourselves called GP, gross profit over cost of execution. That actually is the amount of expansion capital and the kind of net return we get from that. The higher, the more capital efficient expansion you're going to get. On the lower side, on the x-axis, we talk about the pace of transformation. So really, as you expand commercially, how do you also accelerate the transformation? And those are the 2 factors that really drives a capital efficient transition. So if you then look at the business theories out there and what you're taught at business school, well, we all know the general better, cheaper, or the value prop if you look at the model. This model we call the technology adoption model. On the higher side, there's the value prop as you know it. You have to be better. If you have better business case, well, then you're going to be adopted into an industry. The problem is we're talking transformative technologies with no value chains or disrupting value chains. And just looking at the business case is not going to be sufficient. You need to look at the ease of adoption. And furthermore, you need to look at this across value chains. So you cannot rely on just being one way in the value chain. If you are a software company, you do not have that complexity. But if you're transforming a whole industry, you need to ensure that the whole industry is adopting your technology. And the lower side here, just to give some examples, I can tell you, if you're bringing new technologies into the market and you're not as simple to adopt, you will not see corporates changing the security measures or educations they don't have, or setting up new ERP systems in order to adopt your technology. It's not going to happen. And the same accounts for availability. When we're talking utility grade, when we're talking new reindustrialization, or even just classical decarbonization technologies, it's hardware, which means it's services, certification, it's somebody needs to install it. If somebody breaks, you need somebody to come and operate it. And this, I think, is one of the most negative factors. When we look at assets, you see assets that are substantially better, even have a better business case, but because they're not available at scale, you're simply not able to adopt into new value chains or actually transform the one that's there. So let's look at an example on BSAs and how powerful this is. This is a company we invested in our first fund, a small spin out of Fraunhofer. Fraunhofer is more or less the MIT of Europe, a big research entity in Germany with many, many sites. These guys, 4 founders, they found a way to stabilize high watt inductive charging. Inductive charging, wireless charging, you have that probably with your cell phone. It's not revolutionary. Nikola Tesla invented this 100 years ago. But they found out a way to stabilize this with high watt. So when we looked at the company, they did $400K of revenue. They had a handful of customers. We talked about the BCSA model, saying, okay, we need large scale adoption. So are you BCSA? And they said, yeah, well, we're better, because charging a robot in operations is obviously better than it standing in the corner and waiting 30% of the time to charge and then go back in operations. And we'll buy that. Is it cheaper? No, it's twice the cost of a cable solution or switch solution, but it doesn't matter, because IKEA will save 30% of the robots. Okay. And what about simpler? Well, it's not the same size. It's a little larger. And then finally available, well, we didn't have partial production from a qualified provider here. So we said, listen, it's not going to work. We need fast-paced adoption of the value chain. So can you make it BCSA? So they went back, and luckily these are some of the brightest engineers in Europe, and they said, okay, we can do this. We can actually create a product that is half the size with a different bill of materials that allows us to do exactly the same performance of the product, actually do at the same cost of a switch solution, but with 40% gross profit, actually with the same size. So you don't have to re-engineer the robot. You can more or less just swap this in. Sounds a little more complex in reality, but essentially you don't have to redesign the robot. And then finally, use this approach to do high volume minimum requirements while outsourcing this to a recognized producer of this asset rather than doing this internally. They managed to do this with us fairly fast, and that just created an enormous and fast-paced acceleration of the technology. If you look at these customers here, these are more or less the first customers this company won. And it took me 10 years to have any of these brands on my track record. But why would Daimler, Volvo, all these guys, would you use this for industrial? Not because it's green, but because it's obviously better to actually charge wireless rather than having robots standing in the corner. And not only for the end user, definitely also for the integrators, and definitely also for the robot manufacturers, because you really have a much, much higher adoption of automation as doing this. So the whole fundamental of the company is they have kickstarted now a large-scale industry. We sneak peeked into EV, and boom, here Tesla came and took out the asset. And as if you've been following the news streams on Tesla, you can see the robo-taxi is going to come out with wireless charging. And just a little on the KPIs here. First of all, I must say this technology is not new. It's 100 years old. There are many other players in this industry. So why did one company come out and went to 33 countries, grew 2,600%, established 200 platforms in 3.5 years? Because they became BCSA. And obviously, if you look at the green transition, the harbor of Tesla is a great one, because they can really now further accelerate the mobility and the electrified economy based on this. But I think this is a very good example of a company that becomes BCSA and then revolutionizes essentially a value chain. So then you're saying, great, I just need to get BCSA and then I'm home free. Well, not at all. That is just only the starting point. Operating a company that becomes BCSA, you saw the growth acceleration of such a company. Can you imagine 4 engineers within 3.5 years being in 33 countries, scaling 2,600%? that is like steering essentially a school bus with rockets tied to it. So BCSA is only the starting point. And that's why if you look at full changing the math, which is the full toolkit that we're using at Nordic Alpha and we're now releasing as a book, that is your end-to-end strategic and operational toolkit. And if I look at the full cycle here, so when you've become BCSA, you still need to make this mathematical. So you need to have language. You need to really understand the fundamental dynamics of how to operate a company with this kind of mathematics. You need to de-risk this substantially. If you look at all these assets are pioneers. So again, if you look at Ethereum, they're essentially not changing the value chains. In that sense, they're a little more complex, but they are pioneering their growth ratio. And many of these companies will be doing that. And which means that to a large extent, you cannot rely on market data. You need a different way of actually de-risking what you're doing. And you cannot call consultancy reports. We have another investment, German asset that's present in 46 countries called Dimension, which is within the industrialization of 3D print. They do post-processing and is the global leader within that. They actually have consultancy companies calling them to give them market insights on what they're doing. They're converting more than 80% of the customers that decide to go industrial on this, which means that it's ridiculous to buy this consultancy outside what they're doing. They are essentially the industry and they're pioneering this. And I think it's a very good example of when you're doing these things, you'll be the first one out there. You cannot manage based on what you've been taught in business school. If you track a company that are scaling at this acceleration, and remember, an average asset of Nordic Alpha is opening up a new country every 3 to 6 months, and you're scaling with this, and it's capital intensive, which means the capital tie down to do these things is immense. If you look at historic P&Ls and conventional ways of tracking, it will be like steering a Formula One car blindfolded, and I really cannot recommend that. So what we have as part of the toolkit is an AI engine that look at pattern analysis historically of your business, and it's multiplying that with your current commercial activities. And through this, you see patterns of forward projections. It can be incredibly accurate, and it allows you to give with great comfort, continue to invest, continue to go into new areas of business. But it also allows you to see pockets of value, competitive behavior through data pattern analysis, allowing you to really operate your business with very, very high granularity on what's happening in the industry around you. And then finally, we talked about the green tech valley of death. One of the biggest challenges as you're scaling this is obviously the capital expenditure and the dynamics of these industries. And as you can see here on Capitalize, the whole chapter on that and the tools that are coming out of that, you don't want to end in these valleys. I can tell you all these companies here, they are not growing linear. Even though it's exponential, it's not linear. It's going through cycles of value. And you need to ensure that you're funded going through these different cycles of value. Furthermore, as you go through that, you can also gain way more attractive opportunities. Maybe you want to IPO, maybe you want to get debt financing. There's certain elements, and structuring your journey based on this is going to be absolutely key as a management team, as an investor, or even an industrial that is looking to go into new industries. So this is essentially the full toolkit that's coming out as a book, but it's also the value creation toolkit of Nordic Alpha that allows us to pioneer and really scale our companies in this ultra complexity of hyper transformation. So maybe just one more example. I'm running a little out of time here. So this is another example of how BCSA essentially changed the business that was only 6 quarters old. This business, e-mobility business called Spiri, is essentially a spin out of an industrial giant in Europe that wanted to set up turnkey operations for mobility. Mobility is really accelerating fast. It's one of the big transformations that are happening right now. And they had an idea to really go out and do turnkey operations. When we looked at the company, and they were only 6 quarters old, but they were only doing €1 million of revenue, equivalent to $1 million. We looked and said, we can't scale this globally. Even though they're very strong at this, we didn't see the CapEx on the chargers. We didn't see the hands and feet actually scaling on a global scale. So we said, listen, why don't we move back, look at BCSA and set up a structure of a software platform that allows hardware installation to be done by big corporates that are moving into this. So we're taking that complexity out, essentially moving out the A to a large extent as we scale the company, because the capital expenditure would be enormous on the P&L. So So doing this, we set up a software structure that allowed us to actually build a software platform that could scale globally, allowing all the local dynamics of e-mobility, billing, local integration, language, all these things were completely tied off in a way that you could do this based on microservices. We set up this, and in 2.5 years, this company more or less took a complete global leadership position on this. So here are some of the growth parameters and some of the customers over here that it won. And just to put in context, these customers, they weren't looking for the first generation software platforms, or they're looking to do turnkey. They were actually looking for agility. A company like TotalEnergies, they have operations in 55 countries. And they need an agile platform that allows them to use local hardware, local services on fulfillment, however, having a global digital platform that integrates across the globe. And the same counts for Amazon, that's going to do 370,000 chargers globally with one of the largest installations, if not the largest installation in the world. And really it comes back again, this company were 10 employees when we did this. They scaled to 19 countries. They scaled to 130 employees, integrated 400,000 chargers into the platform and grew 4,600%. And also, we only owned the asset for 11 quarters, high value increase based on this, from 8 million euros of valuation to 175 million euros. And then one more thing, when you're BCSA, you're capital efficient. If you look at the other assets in this industry, this company was cash positive in 24. So you did this journey with this acceleration and expansion, and you're still cash positive. And that's the magic of BCSA, because you're going to have an above normal value extraction when you become this. Obviously, I can go deep into de-risk and manage and capitalize. So we did a lot of things in order for us to control this rocket. We transacted the company 6 months ago, and now to Edenred, that is scaling this now to South America, North America, and also several parts of the Asia, which again is a very good harbor for the next generation of e-mobility coming out based on this platform. So in conclusion, from this presentation, the green transition is not only about decarbonizing anymore. It's really becoming a new geopolitical reality. And it's going to drive unseen investments, the largest single investments that we've seen in history, and in a very short period of time. Without technology transformation, we will simply not reindustrialize capital efficiently. But unfortunately, the ratio between pace of time and the exponentiality of complexity is driving this new reality of hypertransformation. But if you look back 25 years from now, we're going to see a new area which have generated thousands of new billionaires. And unfortunately, unlike the transformations we've seen the last 20, 30 years, which was data and digital, where there were primarily new winners, here we're going to look at a lot of losers. If you just look at like the European automotive industry, they're suffering tremendously on what's coming from China. So you're going to see a shift of leadership here from the new business that are going to come out, create new billionaires, but you're also going to see corporates that are going to perish after the last one. The common denominator from these new successful companies and the leaders within this, it will be their ability to navigate hypertransformation. Changing the math is that toolkit. And it's not only about simplifying some models, it is end-to-end toolkit. And that really allows you to demystify, navigate, and drive the utilization of this opportunity. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody. The reindustrialization and the green transition is super complex, or not. It's actually math. And really, you need a mathematical, methodic, systematic approach to doing this. And the world needs new leaders in the thousands to do this. But the leaders that are able to do this will prosper. Here together with Brown, that might be a platform where we can support the development of those. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurits. I'm Mark Blyth. I'm kind of responsible for bringing this together. I'm going to take a few moments now just to put this in context and then open up the conversation a little bit before we bring it to everyone who's joined us today for your questions, comments, and other such matters. So let me try and put this in context. I have a PhD student from years back who teaches at Copenhagen Business School. And he told me about this guy called Laurits who had solved the Valley of Death problem. I thought, oh, really? Because this is a huge issue, right? You want to do anything in the green tech space with real investment, not software, not financial trickery. You're talking hard tech, and that means massive upfront costs, That means huge uncertainties over technology, returns, and it basically means investors either don't invest or they get scared and they simply go back to doing what they know, which is what the current private equity industry does. And Laurits sent me his book, and I read it and immediately thought this has to be a course, because these different sections that he talked about, de-risking, etc., these are modules in waiting, and each of them build on each other to give me and you a whole new way of thinking about things. To open this up a little bit more with an example that's in the book that he didn't talk about, I'm going to invite Laurits to tell us something more about BCSA. So BCSA, the last two letters are the most important ones, in my opinion. That's what's been added on. You alluded to that, but I want you to give us a concrete example. Tell us about how being simpler and available really changed what you were able to do with a product called Microshade. Give us the Microshade story with a special attention to those two variables.
Yeah, so Microshade is a complete revolutionary technology, and it was actually the company where the BCSA was designed, because essentially what this platform is a membrane integrating into glass, and it does one thing that is completely magical. It can take out energy without taking out light, and at a level that is 500% more efficient than any other technology, which means essentially it doesn't add any complexity. You just do the same pane as you know it into a building, but you will have no energy coming into that. The problem with this product is I couldn't sell it. It was impossible. So even though there are 35 drivers that actually classifies the quality of a building, anything from indoor climate, energy profile, maintenance profile, flexibility on the floor plan, this technology is better than any other alternative on the planet in all 35 categories, and was impossible for me to sell it. And I was so frustrated. And then when the book comes out saying, I don't know what to do, looking at BTM, this AI engine, we weren't converting. And then I said, okay, I decided to map out the full value chain of the construction industry. And here it became very, very evident for me why we weren't selling. Because even though the product was revolutionary at the end of the value chain, essentially the architects, they didn't like there was a stripe inside of it. The engineers had to calculate it in a different way, so it weren't simpler. And the construction companies, they didn't care about a lifetime value, simplicity. They only cared about capex. So essentially, we had massive barriers, even though the end user would have a humongous benefit. And just put this in context: 1/3 of all CO2 on the planet is coming from heating and cooling of buildings. So this has really from a CO2 impact. So we did two things. Either I could give up because I couldn't deal with this, or I could innovate, or I could disrupt. So we decided to actually change the business model to only sell the value of the product, change it to a financial business model, and loop the whole industry. And boom, suddenly we're selling into large real estate companies because we had to take out this element. And secondary, we launched an innovation process, and the product is coming into market now, which is called a BCSA product, because we are invisible. The product is invisible. It is, even if you calculate it wrong, you're still going to have better performance than calculating it right, and on the same cost for the construction guys. So essentially BCSA against the value chain, and we know it's coming out, and the demand is huge on this technology. So that's a very good example of how you can actually change a value chain, even though you have a product that is revolutionary at the end. You're not going to be able to adopt. And a very good example of the green transition.
We've got a few minutes. We're going to do a poll for everyone who's here at 40 minutes to the hour. So we've got 5 minutes. I want to ask you something else. We didn't have time to get into this, but it would be almost like class 2 once we've done the overview, if we were to do a class. Hypergrowth and hyper transformation. I'm always reminded of a line from the film The Lord of the Rings where they say, war is upon you whether you wish it or not. And it seems to be that if you're BCSA, what's going to happen is you're going to be in hypergrowth. And you're going to have to manage it. And managing that is an entirely different thing. You alluded very briefly to how you manage this. Tell us about what you call hypothesis-based growth scaling and why that's such a different way of managing complexity and hypergrowth.
Yes. The thing is, as I said before, if you become BCSA and you're a transformative, you are pioneering. You're going where nobody else has gone before. And if you call one of the big consultancy company, they'll help you, but they can't, because you're pioneering in to unknown territory. And you're, by the way, doing this, as I said before, you're a rocket on a school bus. So, and the CapEx expenditure of doing that is tremendous, which means you will die if you fail in these growth cycles because you cannot carry that failure. So the de-risking chapter has 3 elements. It has what we call FPS, which is fixed point strategies. It's essentially you put in polls into the market to collect data to build hypotheses. And those hypotheses you then scale, potentially multiple alongside each other in order to get data validation on a growth strategy. But you don't do it based on just getting that data back on that. You're only doing it in areas of hyperreplication, which means that the hypothesis, as you prove those out, will actually allow you to double down and 1000x your investment into the proof of the hypothesis to get the same net return every single time. Give you a good example with Spiri. Spiri, we had this hypothesis that we could build this platform. We could actually see that on the data tracking that we went into the corporate setting, that within 3 months, we converted 67% of all dialogues that were validated. 67%, that is complete disruption in a market where there's 50 competitors within 3 months. We gave us that comfort that we were working with a hypothesis here that from a data and return standpoint, was so attractive that we decided to double down. So you don't scale a company with this pace in 11 quarters and become cash positive. It is impossible unless you do this kind of engine. And we knew the return on every single dollar we invested, even 1 year in. And that allowed us to scale incredibly capital efficient with very low risk, even though we're expanding to a new country every second month.
That was great. Thanks very much. We're almost at Laurie. Yeah, here's Laurie. Laurie, why didn't you come in now and do the poll at this point in time?
Hi, everyone. I know you are eager to get to the Q&A, and we will get there in a second. But first, we're going to do a quick poll. So we are considering a class on today's subject matter. It would be called A New Era of Re-Industrialization, How to Master a Capital-Efficient Green Transition at Scale. And this 6-session class, taught by Mark Blyth and Laurits Bach Sørensen, will provide a toolkit to business leaders, investors, and entrepreneurs to help them navigate unprecedented challenges in a market shaped by hypergrowth, disruptive technologies, and value chain transformations. What would be your preferred format for this class? You're going to choose a first, second, and third choice. 1 90-minute session each week for 6 weeks, 2 90-minute sessions each week for 3 weeks, or 3 hours a day for 3 consecutive days. So please check your first, second, and third choices. I'll give you a minute there. The second question is, how likely would you be to enroll in the 6-session class on the New Era of Re-Industrialization, How to Master a Capital-Efficient Green Transition at Scale for $3,500? This was a single choice. And the final question is, how likely are you to recommend today's program to others? Again, a single choice. So we'll take about 10 more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to end the poll, and we're going to then go to questions and answers. So we have a bunch of questions that have come in for our speakers. So what is the best way to bring a seismic change in corporations' attitudes toward climate change? Start with the 5 to 10% market leaders and have them be the influencers, or condition a larger group all at once. What's been the market approach to date, and is it working?
Yeah, so I understood what is the right approach and actually to lead these transformations. Isn't that essentially what is being said?
Yes.
Good, yeah. So you're not going to summon people. So the right thing is because you want to do that, that's too slow. So you need a subset of leaders that have the characteristics of BCSA, that have the ability to be capitalized in order to really accelerate that transformation. Because I think that what we're looking at now is going to have a lot of losers inside of it as well. And I think it's two different battles. Do you really want to create and maintain an industry, or do you want to drive fast-paced transformation? So I believe the right approach is really having out new pioneers that goes out and leads this acceleration. Unless it is where you have very, very large government interest to build regulatory environments where conventional industries can go in and participate. As we're seeing in China, for example, on the automotive industry, where they're creating very favorable infrastructures for e-mobility. They're subsidizing lithium to the industry, giving them a huge competitive edge, which is then driving a lot of competition from many new players going into automotive. I think that's a very dangerous approach for the rest of the world, but it's very, very, very impactful, and that gets the whole industry moving in the right direction.
Okay, next, how do we help executives in the energy industry understand it's no longer about decarbonization, but a new geopolitical battlefield when many aren't even sold on sustainability?
Yeah, but I think this is the good thing. If you look at it, because it's not about decarbonization, it's a geopolitical battlefield. Rest assured, they know. And I think that the good thing about it, I think you can see that in one of my slides, is this is probably the most positive push for the green transition, because you have to participate in this. The energy sector have to do this, and it's just impossible to do what we did previously in a reindustrialized world. So I think they're going to be pulled into this. And let me just have one comment. There are no premiums for green technologies in Europe. Doesn't exist. There's nobody who really wants to do it. So if you don't have a free market transformation, you might have companies that are more coloring themselves around this, but the real drivers are coming from the free market, or they're coming from geopolitical realities, or they're coming from regulatory or subsidized reality. Right now, that opportunity is just increasing tremendously with reindustrialization.
Right. Hypergrowth and hypertransformation can sound disruptive to employees and organizational culture. How can you maintain stability and employee engagement during such transformations?
Wow, that's a really good question. And it's actually also going to be part of the book a little, because the whole capitalized element and the cycles also comes down to cultural transformation. And I can tell you, this is very, very difficult. The answer we have, so first of all, it's all about front loading. So you need to be always one cultural cycle ahead of it. Which means that as these companies scale from 10 to 1,000 people, you're going to be going through some rapid cultural transformations. If you're not front-loaded on your leadership capabilities, on your organizational capabilities, on your processes, on your professionalization, this is going to kill your company. You're simply not going to be able to fuel that disruption and that maintain pace. This really is one of the most difficult things to solve for, because you have founders, they most likely are not going to be able to run 1,000 person company versus 100. So we need to have transitions on these things from the founder side potentially. And I think we do it, we front load these things to a large extent in a pre-strategy process. But this is truly a very difficult thing. And you need to accept that many of the people that are employed in a 50 people company are not going to enjoy working in 1,000. So you're also going to have a big transition of people moving out. That's a natural evolution as you professionalize these companies.
What emerging trends do you think will have the most significant impact on firms' ability to achieve hypergrowth over the next decade?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
What emerging trends do you think will have the most significant impact on firms' abilities to achieve hypergrowth over the next decade?
BCSA.
Sorry?
BCSA. So you need to, if you want to maintain hypergrowth, with these changing dynamics, we're talking new realities. So you need to have a value prop that allows you to think outside the box. And that is what, as Mark said before, you need to look at the lower side of the BCSA model. It's the S&A that is truly the transformative element. The B and C is just your value prop. But as you're adopting new realities here, you need to have that complete set of capabilities. And I think that's going to be the defining factor. You can already now look at what are the big transformative companies. Look at Tesla and just look at BCSA. They set up their own charging infrastructure. they took out the C by really building their own battery factories. Elon is essentially taking the BCSA model. Everything they're doing in China and automotive is based on the BCSA model. So you're going to see these companies, if they're not able to compete, somebody will outcompete them because they're going to be BCSA.
Now, many in the audience work in the nonprofit or public sector roles. How adaptable are these hypergrowth strategies to organizations that don't prioritize profit maximization?
Well, I think you can see we do a lot of things from an altruistic standpoint. I think they provide language and understanding. So if you're a policymaker, this provides insights on really how to understand the dynamics, the developing dynamics, and how to do policies. If you're in a nonprofit organization, well, look at what you can do to actually contribute and fuel these things. But I want to say one thing, and I don't know how many people are in the green transition. We are not going to be able to succeed by stop doing something. The only way we can reach net zero in a capital efficient way is through tech transformation. An average top executive in one of our assets, so we call those economic sustainability leaders, one of those, there are 5 that we contemplate in one of our assets, offsets 70,000 people, one person. That is really the impact that such a person can do. So if you really want to sit there in these organizations, think about how you can fuel that transformation that technology can do within the green transformation. So, so I think there are many, many elements outside the commercial world here that's going to be a key part of this solution.
Okay.
Laurits, let me jump in here for a second. So let me again put this in some kind of context, then pull a question from the Q&A that's come in. Go back 10 years. A lot of interest in the green transformation was all about finance. How are we going to finance this? And then we got disappointed by that because it turns out it's not really a finance problem. It's a doing things problem with hard tech, right? Then people flipped and said, okay, if the finance guys can't do it, if that's not going to work, we need to go to the state. And one of the questions that came in is, I appreciate your presentation. As the United States is putting a greater focus on innovation investments through agencies like the Defense Innovation Unit, DARPA more broadly, what are some of the macro investment vehicles to help scale and manage these projects? In short, how would government interface with the private sector that's going BCSA? What's the most useful thing a government can do?
Great. That's a very good question. And well, create stability in the upper left corner. So I'm sharing the slides again. I don't know if people can see it. So create stability on the upper left corner. That's what they need to do. And that stability is providing long-term visibility on what's happening on the regulatory side, ensuring you're subsidizing to complete the value chains. Again, I think China is doing a fantastic job here. Again, going back to e-mobility, as I discussed before, they provide long-term stability. They decided that if you want to do a building in China, you need to set up hyperchargers outside. So they just provided a platform of infrastructure, which means that the whole market is so huge and they have stability in that reestablishment of the value chain while providing subsidies on lithium, which means that essentially you're giving all the Chinese automotive manufacturers a huge competitive edge to go and compete globally. This is what the macro should do. Create stability in that area. The free market can deal, and the finance market can deal with tech innovation, we even CapEx intensity and hypergrowth on an organizational side. But the uncertainty created in the upper left corner, that is really what's going to kill companies. Again, maybe one more thing. Look at hydrogen in Europe. Hydrogen was the leading continent on the planet 3 years ago. We stock listed a hydrogen asset, and we did that based on EU saying that we're going to be the global leading continent and we're going to put 10 billion euros into this. Now, 3 years later, 4 years later, we've lost that complete competitiveness. China took that market overnight, and we can't even get the hydrogen value chains in place across borders to really ensure that you do capital efficient electrolysis or conversion of green energy into hydrogen. So this is a very good example of where the macro is failing and where the government is failing tremendously to provide stability. And even our asset is being penalized on this, because now you can provide a capital efficient project, you cannot get distribution in place in order to actually get the hydrogen moving into a hydrogen economy, which is by the way super key if we want to decarbonize industry and reindustrialize.
One of the comments that came in is, can you elaborate on what you mean by, quote, front-loaded leadership This went back to your earlier comments about managing hypergrowth. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so if you look at the 3 cycles that you're going to have on the leadership side, on the management team side, when you have your less sub 20, 30 people, you more or less have a very flatter key kind of approach. Then you move into your first cycle, which means that now you have clear leaders, CSOs, a real C-level. And then you have your third level where you have business units. If you're backloaded on this rather front-loaded, then you're going to not have the leadership capabilities to deal with the maturity needed from an organizational standpoint to manage your business. So when we talk about front-loading these things, the cultural transformation, we're always one ahead of the curve saying, listen, within 1 year, 2 years, you're going to be leading through managers, you're going to have BUs, you're going to be present in 30 countries. So how are you going to set up leadership skills to deal with that, even though it hasn't happened today? That's what I mean by front loading. And if you don't, you're going to get dramatically ineffective. Right now, we have a full capacity at Nordic Alpha only dealing with this. We spent 3 to 9 months prior with our assets to really get all these things in place with the company, ensuring real cultural transformation, getting those cycles of HR structures in place, alongside, of course, deploying the full changing the math.
I want you to talk a little bit more about de-risking. We got from BCSA, the last 2 components. We talked a little bit about hypothesis scaling and fixed point strategies. The next bit, right? What happens next? Tell us that story.
Yeah, so the BDM engine, the business directory management, what essentially is, it is historic pattern analysis. So what you do, it's a tracking engine that looks at all historic data and you get out patterns. And those patterns you multiply with your current expansion activities. So that is lead time, that is conversion ratios, that is vertical analysis on or geographical analysis. And multiplying these efforts of commercial engagement with historic patterns allows you to project into the future. It is incredibly accurate when you do it this. But if you look at it the other way around, if you're not able to look into the future, let's say you're growing with 65%, then the average return on investment on our assets is anything from sort of return on gross profit is anything from 6 to 12 months, which means that the capital tie down for you to scale to the next cycle on your organizational side, 65% more employees. On the capital expenditure side, it's 65% up to 6 of your last year revenue. If you're not able to auto project on this, and this is what the BTM engine could do, you're potentially investing yourselves over the edge. And that's what it can do. And it's very advanced. It also allows you through these patterns to see competitive scenarios, even different platforms that you're launching into the market, if they have different reactions. And what you're looking for is the maximized return on your expansion activities. It can even look at different hypotheses on the de-risking side, saying this hypothesis have this net return within 3 months. This one has this. Okay, so we're doubling down on this. So it's essentially a data layer that allows you to demystify and actually view into what is happening into the future by using what happened in the past. And of course, it is not a forecasting tool, as you can imagine, but it's incredibly accurate and it allows you to track your business in a very different way. I always say there are 2 companies on the planet. They're the companies that are doing this and the companies that are not doing it. And when you understand it, you'll move away completely from conventional tracking.
We've got time for one more before Jen comes in to close us out in 2 minutes. So you have 2 minutes to do this one very quickly. From Dixit, do we have access to enough green energy resources to sustain hypergrowth? Or will we become increasingly reliant on traditional energy sources such as fossil fuels, which may face growing pressure? How do we balance out that equation?
Easy. We have plenty capabilities to set up renewable infrastructure. And to be honest, if you look at how reindustrialization will happen, it is way better because you can actually produce the energy where you need it. Yeah, in Europe, we're talking about behind the meter or completely self-sufficient energy production. There are so many great renewable technologies out there that are able to utilize green energy or renewable energy production. But that puts a lot of pressure on the grid because if you need to do this, you need to have been electrified. You potentially need storage facilities. So it's putting a lot of strain on other capabilities. The grid in Europe is not able to deal with this right now. So essentially, we cannot move the energy from Denmark is producing to Germany or to Norway, or at least not in the scale always needed, which means that that's one of the downsides of this. But essentially, 80% of the energy production in Denmark is already green, but we're soon going to move to 100. And again, Denmark doesn't have a lot of sun. We're doing wind parks into the ocean to do this. But so yes, the answer is there's plenty of green energy out there, but it puts a lot of strain on the energy value chain in order for us to fully capture this.
We could go on for a long time, and I hope that we get a chance to in the context of a class, but unfortunately we need to bring this to a close. Laurie, I pass back to you.
Thank you. Just wanted to thank everybody, thank our speakers, Laurits, Bach, Sørensen, and Mark Blyth, and all of our attendees. We hope that you will join us on February 10th to hear our next masterclass by Professor Baba Prasad on strategic agility, mastering the 5 keys to strategize and lead in an uncertain world. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next time.
Thank you all.